It was reliably reported by several persons that a rain of stones fell from a clear blue sky in Collins Street in the town of Chamberlain on August 17th. The stones fell principally on the home of Mrs. Margaret White, damaging the roof extensively and ruining the two gutters and the downspout valued at approximately $25. Mrs. White, a widow, lives with her 3-year-old daughter, Carrie. Mrs. White could not be reached for comments. Welcome back, ladies and gentlefolk, and happy Halloween. Storytelling is one of the oldest human traditions and has many functions in genres in society. We share stories to bond, each of their own liking and style. One of the reasons why we consume horror particularly is to experience stimulation. Exposure to terrifying acts or anticipation of those acts can stimulate us, both mentally and physically, in opposing ways. Negatively in the form of fear and anxiety, or positively in a form of excitement or joy. One of the most prolific writers of our time proposes that the appetite for horror is a need that all people have. The horror film is an invitation to indulge in deviant antisocial behavior by proxy, to commit gratuitous acts of violence, indulge to our pure light dreams of power, to give to our most craven fears. Perhaps more than anything else, the horror story or horror movie say it's okay to join the mob or become a total tribal being, to destroy the outsider. It has never been done better or more literally than in Shirley Jackson's short story, The Lottery, where the entire concept of the outsider is symbolic, created by nothing more than a black circle colored on a slip of paper. It's not a stone or a sentence or anything even remotely threatening, but something that comes with a consequence, that's eventually going to rain down on us. And to pull this, you don't have to be anything but slightly unlucky. Here we are again with an epistolary novel, strangely, after last year's deep dive into Lucy Westenra's storyline in Dracula. And yet, Stephen King's Carrie couldn't be more different. It is as perfectly proportioned as a Greek tragedy could be. Tragedy dealt with big themes of love, loss, and pride, abuse of power, the fraught relationship between man and gods. Typically, the main protagonist of a tragedy commits some terrible crime without realizing how foolish and arrogant he has been. Then, as slowly he realizes this error, the world crumbles around him. The three great playwrights' tragedy were Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. Aristotle, however, argues that tragedy cleanses the heart through pity and terror, purging us from our petty concerns and worries by making us aware that there can be nobility in suffering. He called this experience catharsis. It's both the horror genres and the tragedy's own characteristic to clear up the picture, but also to alter the perception on our own humanity. The ancient Greeks took their entertainment very seriously and used the drama as a way of investigating the world they live in and what it means to be a human. Both through tragedy and horror, we face our own flaws. And subsequently, we see them eradicated on paper, on stage, or on screen. It's typical for stage dramas to have events happening behind the scene of stage. Just like in the epistolary genre, where we see events happening through either letters, articles, or to a secondary form of delivery. Thus, it can be regarded as the successor of ancient dramas. The plot. Let's set the scene as a classical play. Our themes are blood curse, coming of age, and atonement. Chekhov's gun's a knife, and the sewing machine is a symbol of freedom. The classical plays have very few elements, and they're composed to be digestible to a wider audience. These stories are very well organized, have a clear beginning, a clear end, and, of course, climax point. It has to illustrate a principle of tragedy that shows the downfall of a hero. The hero must commit a heinous act or hubris, and the mistake going to eventually lead to a disaster. The tragic suffering of a hero arouses feelings of fear and pity in the audience. The effect such feelings produce emotional projection. Modern narrative structures tend to have more complexity, but follows technically the same line. The novelist Gustav Freytag developed this narrative pyramid in the 19th century as a description of a structure fiction writers used for millennia. Freytag's pyramid describes 5 key stages of a story, offering a conceptual framework of sort of writing a story from start to finish. These stages are exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. Besides the key elements, of course, the most important storytelling tools are the characters embodying certain aspects of the human psyche, or simply there to provide an audience a unique observation point as invitation to be part of the plot. Let's see our characters. 16-year-old Carrie, the eponymous protagonist of the novel, lives with her Christian fundamentalist mother Margaret, who is verbally and physically abusive. Carrie grows up extremely sheltered due to her mother's beliefs and the belief system that they share, to the point that when she gets the first period in the school's locker room, she doesn't know what it is and believes that she is dying. Margaret White is Carrie's mother. She raises Carrie by herself. Her late husband Rolf died before Carrie's birth. Margaret is deeply religious and has particular contempt for female bodies and sexuality. When she got pregnant after having intercourse with Rolf for the first time, she miscarried, and even interpreted that as a divine punishment from God. In the novel present, she extremely abusive toward Carrie, yet simultaneously she fears her due to her increasing telekinetic abilities. Sue is Carrie's classmate. She is in the locker room when Carrie gets her first period. Although she participates in taunting Carrie, she later feels deeply remorseful about this and questions her own complicity in the cruelty the student body has shown Carrie over the years. To atone for the poor behavior, of course, Sue asks her very popular boyfriend Tommy to ask Carrie to prom, giving up her own opportunity to attend the dance that she's been dreaming of since years. The novel ranks up an array of other characters, including Sue's boyfriend Tommy, who takes Carrie to the prom, uh, who seems to hold genuine affection for Carrie. Chris, who is behind the prank that breaks Carrie to unleash her vengeance, and Chris' toxic boyfriend, Billy, uh, who acts out her who acts out his own resentment on the town with Carrie as a butt of the joke. Exposition. Background information of the plot that includes characters and setting. What we are learning in the exposition is disheartening. Carrie being abused by her peers, called named and tortured on daily basis since years. We are talking about physical and mental torture. We are talking about putting peanut butter in her hair, stealing her clothes, putting snakes in her shoes. Something that real cruelty only can produce. But we also get to know from another article a different point of view that Carrie's birth has a troublesome background. Margaret is a person with fundamentalist Christian beliefs. She and her husband even left the church because they found the church too soft. When she gives birth to Carrie, she is recently widowed, and though she has cancer, not pregnancy, and that soon she will join her husband in heaven. We get to peer into Carrie's inner monologue for a second here, which is pelted with biblical references, self-soothing passages, and a dollop of wishing for revenge, including the motives of stones mentioned again that she acted out when she was just a child. And this signifies that Carrie has vague memories about her powers and that stones were raining down on the house when she was just a kid, which was a result of her mother having a feud with the neighbor's girl who was wearing a bathing suit. And Margaret was chastising her that she's showing herself off and that she is going to hell. And Carrie did not like that. Backstory includes details on her father too, who seemed to be just as fervent in faith as Margaret, carrying a gun allegedly as protection against the Antichrist and a Bible of all time. Later this scene, Carrie shatters a mirror just by staring at it after she comes home and before she confronts with her mother. Her inner monologue here lasts some pages, and it shows that despite the perception of her being dumb as an ox, she does have a very rich inner life, but it has been oppressed and pressured by the mother's absolutely restrictive faith. Shattering a mirror as both symbolic of the strengthening of her telekinetic power and sort of a realization that her entire inner world just crumbled. Not later, later she tries to confront her mother on the subject of keeping her ignorant, which her mother greets with a colossal backhand and sends Carrie to pray in the closet. Part of this section happens outside Carrie's reach. Chris Hargenson's Mean Girl Squad, who decided to torture Carrie on the occasion of her first period, and in an instance of her ignorance, who is driving the plot at this moment, this time are excluded from prom, which is not taken lightly by the group. Light violence ensues between Miss Desjardins and the girls, and we learn, due to a conversation between the principal and Chris Hargenson's father, that it's not the first time that she is showing tendencies to pick on vulnerable people. Like Irma Swope, who almost lost a toe due to Chris putting firecracker in her shoes. Chris subsequently tries to convince Sue to drop from prom too, or at least protest it. The chapter ends with Sue realizing that she lost status by sticking up with Chris, and can cause her losing the dreamed up cushy suburban white picket life in clean corners and her country club membership if she keeps taking sides with Carrie is progressing, flexes her telekinetic muscles. Her thoughts are less riddled with Bible verses, and she thinks about imps, witches, and familiars. Her thoughts are generally more coherent. Using her powers are still exhausting her. She acts defiantly against her own mother, which results in clashing between the two. Seeing it as a sort of atonement, Sue asks Tommy, her boyfriend, to take Carrie to the prom. He protests lightly, pointing out that it can further vex Carrie, but reluctantly accepts. And so does Carrie, after making it sure that it's not part of some sort of elaborate humiliation ritual. He does have care for her, even noticing some of her womanly features as straight out attractive. She is not trusting. She sees it as a possible cruel joke, even as a nightmare, but she still agrees. She even finds her strength to go to an upscale fabric store instead of a safe choice Woolworths, where she used to buy her wools and linens for her clothing, and she's lavishing in the choices instead of just choosing something drab. Even finds comfort in imagining using her power in just an emergency. She is imagining destroying the shops, throwing mannequins, people screaming and running out to the street, just in case. As she is laying in her bed, thinking about her fabric down in the basement on a cool shelf, she understands that she opened the floodgate. Literally and figuratively, if we think about her menstruation the first time, her power is now in full force. And she's in possession now of her old memories, and she remembers exhibiting power even when she was a kid. She is fantasizing about creating her dress and sees it as an embodiment of freedom itself. At dinner, Carrie tells Margaret that Tommy asked her to prom, and she accepted it. Margaret throws her tea in Carrie's face and tries to appeal to Carrie with praying, but it doesn't seem to faze Carrie anymore. Margaret tries to persuade her with violence, but she is unmoved. She tries to slap her, but she stops her hand mid-air. She's determined to go to the prom. More calmly, Carrie tells Margaret that she doesn't want to fight, but she is going to live her own life. Later, when she is alone, Carrie is uneasy about the reaction, but thinks that this feeling is better than being in the closet. She also thinks about Tommy's invitation, that it must be an attempt of atonement or something. She ponders whether her gift is one of the light or of the darkness. And she realizes that she does not care either way. As a surprise inserted in the story, an excerpt from the Shadowy Exploded notes that, like the bleeding disorder hemophilia, an affliction affecting royal families, the gene of the telekinesis is recessive. Hemophilia primarily presents in males, while telekinesis presents primarily in females. If Carrie has been born male, she would be only the carrier of the gene, without any telekinetic abilities. The paper goes on to compare a female with telekinesis gene to Typhoid Mary, capable of mass destruction. As a result of the prom proposal idea, Sue keeps losing her status, which worries her, but does not deter from carrying out her plan. She has to reconcile with her own self, rather than with her social circle. Chris continuing her plan as she sees the ballot for prom king and prom queen. She enlists her delinquent boyfriend to act out her revenge. They drove out of town at a farm. They unpack an ice chest, 2 galvanized buckets, a sledgehammer, and a butcher's knife. They kill a soul. They collect her blood. The die has been cast. On the morning of prom, Carrie tries on her dress and revealing her new push-up bra, which makes her feel both excited and very ashamed. Her mother walks in and says that she knew that the dress would be red and that everyone would be looking at her dirty pillows. Carrie points out that every woman has breasts, and her mother says they should burn the dress and pray. When Carrie quietly refuses, Margaret rakes her nail across her own cheeks. Carrie tells her mother that this won't change anything. And Margaret screams and punches herself in the face. Carrie flexes the bedroom door open, pushes her mother out, and tells her that she loves her and is very sorry. As Margaret prays in a very alarming manner, Carrie stares at the cuckoo clock, which is a recurring element for both Margaret and Carrie. We get a glimpse of her yet again, tumultuous inner monologue, wondering if Tommy actually come and pick her up. She is still doubting the whole experience, and she is not yet fully giving in to the excitement of actually going to prom. Chris and Billy are a room about the Cavalier, which in our story symbolizes the roadhouse that Margaret fears and loathes at the same time, a tavern outside the city limits, where Chris ponders their relationship. She thinks that if she had not finally allowed Billy to sleep with her on Monday, that he would have forced her to do so. He is the first lover she has not been able to puppet completely. To understand her character, we have to see that Chris is everything that Margaret feared Carrie becomes. She is a person who employs her own power to manipulate others, obviously. It gives into her own sexuality a substance user, and frequenting roadhouses. Maybe she even drinks whiskey. The clash of the two characters between Carrie and Chris is inevitable. In the school parking lot, Tommy opens the car door for Carrie and tells her not to be nervous. He says that she reminds him of Galatea, a character in Greek mythology whom no one recognizes when she turns into a beautiful woman. At this moment, Carrie experiences the first glimpses of normalcy with Tommy. Grabbing a burger and a root beer seems to be normal teenage occupations. But of course, if it's off the table if you manage to grow up in an isolated semi-feral creature with questionable hygiene resulted by parental ascetic practices. Meanwhile, Margaret walks slowly through the quiet house and thinks about her grandmother, who also had the devil's power. Shortly after the grandmother's funeral, Margaret remembers seeing Carrie in her crib, laughing at her bottle dangled in thin air. She thinks that Rolf stopped her from killing Carrie then. She gets the butcher's knife from the kitchen and starts to slowly sharpen it. Carrie seems to ease into the prom vibe with Tommy, admiring the throne adorned with fresh flowers, noticing the other partygoers, smelling Norma's perfume from Woolrich, and just looking at the people with a very different eyes. An eyes of not as an outsider, but somebody who, even just for a faint moment, feels belonging. And this is such an alarmingly innocent scene. It's It's 7 minutes past 10. The class president announces that Tommy and Carrie have won the ballot by one vote. With the vote that Tommy made for them against Carrie's pleading, someone gives Tommy a scepter and puts the robe over Carrie's shoulder and leads the couple to the stage at the band's plays. And the audience applauds, and Carrie does not detect any sarcasm in it. Tommy takes her hand and thinks that he loves Sue, but he loves Carrie too. They both have the same light in their eye. They announce the king and queen, and Tommy leads up Carrie to the stage. A solemn and sacred moment, which quickly turns into apocalyptic. Chris pulls the rope, and Carrie is suddenly drenched. As she opens her eyes, the audience bursts out in laughter. A bucket lands on Tommy's head, making him the first victim of the massacre. The audience is blissfully unaware that he is dead at this point, and they will be soon too. Following action, the event that unravels the conflicts between the protagonist and the antagonist that leads to the resolution. Carrie is broken. She runs out of the hall, tripping over, and looks back one last time before the sprinklers go off and one of her classmates gets shocked to death by electricity. I am reluctant to describe all the horrors. Besides the few who got out, all died inside the ballroom. Carrie deliberately targeted the gas station for explosion, then went to church thinking her mother was right in everything. She actually did touch some grass, leaving the ballroom, deliberating for a second to run home, but apparently she decided to choose violence. She turned back and flexed the door closed. She was thinking only about ruining everyone's dress. But apparently,
We are seeing the carnage from different vantage points, which is a very big advantage of the epistolary genre. From the point of the few survivors, a drunk from his holding cell, emergency reports, and of course Sue, who is frantically driving towards the school and sees it exploding. We briefly even revisit the last moments of Tommy. By 12:18, due to a cigarette butt carelessly tossed by the ambulance car driver, the city has been cut off from the emergency services from outside town. Carrie walks home to confront with her mother. Margaret is waiting for her, ready to kill her daughter, and reciting all those times when she backslid when she's supposed to kill her, according to her. But she backtracked and she bemoaning all those incidents. She stabs Carrie in the shoulder. The next section is so eerie and beautifully written. Carrie decides to kill Margaret by slowing her heart down as she recites the Lord's Prayer. It's a very beautifully written scene, and it shows such mercy. Carrie staggers out and ends in the roadhouse parking lot bleeding. After a hearty look into the state of Chris Hargensen and Billy, they decide to bail, leaving the roadhouse. That is where they have to face her, full of righteous rage, driven by the void of the black abyss itself. From this on, her thoughts are not entirely coherent anymore. She faces off Chris, running their car into the roadhouse, killing both of them in the action.
Sue now finds her in the parking lot. The end is the same. The wretched, the outlier, has to be destroyed to save the life and the way of life of the innocents, like Mina, like Sue Snell. But instead of ragtag gang of Victorian Avengers, Carrie takes it into her own hand, exhausts her powers, faces her dark side, and die. The story is concluded. The moral is ours. It's not yet complete. There are excerpts all through the book about the research on telekinetic power, and we even get a glimpse of Stu Snell's memoir where she talks about a niece who exhibits telekinetic power, maybe her daughter. We don't know. Thank you for coming with me on this adventure, ladies and gentlefolk. I hope you enjoyed the video. Have a wonderful Halloween Eve, and see you next time. Thanks for running with scissors.